making sure this is on. Okay. Welcome, everybody. A lot of people thought the audience downstairs was for us, but it turned out that the whole other agenda down there. But welcome. Thanks for coming out to our lecture today. David, Sweet, and I are very appreciative of your participation. Today's lecture is about a recent book published by one of our members. You may know that we do have a number of members who are authors. Certainly my friend David Sweet is one that comes to mind immediately when thinking about our well-known Wincea authors. But you may not have known that Fred Wacker is also an accomplished author. So Fred, going back through his biography, grew up in this car racing culture. His father led a team of race drivers and promoted car racing in those days after World War II and into the 50s. So today, Fred's going to share with us a lot of his personal memories of that era and what his father was doing, car racing throughout the Midwest, and his father's exploits as a race car owner and a driver. And at the conclusion, back in the corner back there, there are a number of books that Fred's going to be talking about. So if you like one, just sign a chit and we'll bill it to your number. And you'll, I think, enjoy it. It's quite a great book. So please welcome our friend, Fred Wacker.
Well, good to see everybody. It's humbling to have a crowd this big, full of friends, to talk about something that is interesting to me anyway. And my father was a modest man, first and foremost. He was a person that had a lot of interest. He led a pretty exciting life, but when it came to car racing, if you talked to him about it, if you initiated it, he'd love to spin the tales and talk, but he didn't really brag about it too much. And there are a couple people like my cousin Tom who saw him race in the room. I never did, because he raced between 1948 and 1956, and I was born in 1960. My mother came along in 57. So these pictures, many of the trophies, he had a few of them on the shelf in our family library, but a lot of the things that are at the table, and really 2 or 3 bankers boxes full of just jumbled things, were in the basement of our family home, and they never saw the light of day until 10 years after my father passed away. We had them tied up with in cardboard boxes with string, and my mom said, "Clean the basement. Your dad's stuff is down there." And digging into it was remarkable, just to open the boxes and find these mementos of that time. And Tim Reynolds helped me in the audience. Tim, thank you so much. He's a fellow race fan. We've both gone to the Indy 500 many times with my father, and Tim and I still go. Another friend of mine, John Szymanski, helped me sort these pictures and start to put them into piles and figure out what we had. And I was introduced, and I'll tell you this story a little later, to a man named Bob Birmingham, who's an 84-year-old retired banker who lives in Mequon, Wisconsin, who actually saw my father race in Elkhart Lake in the early 50s. And he said, "I'm up for one more book if you help me write it." And so we did it together, and it's been really fun. So we're going to talk about the book now. And that picture on the cover, I think, tells a lot about my dad. Clean living, clean race car. He was a professional at a time when gentlemen were on the starting grids, and the racing was moving from a gentleman's sport, amateur sport, to professionalism. And he was in the beginning parts of that. This picture here, that's the first picture I can find of my father smiling, and he had a great smile, which you'll see over and over again in these pictures. And the picture on the right is the first picture I could find of his earliest racing exploits. And that's actually a picture of a bunch of boys in Lake Forest that made with their fathers pond boats to race on the pond at Lake Forest Academy. They're little sailboats with a canvas sail. And if you look in the back row from left to right, there's A.B. Dick, Kent Chandler, Billy Granis, unknown person, and Fred on the far right. And down in the front row, Eddie Prinz, Scotty McLennan, George Birmingham, Ed Birmingham, and Julian Armstrong. So those are a couple of local names from a long time ago, but that's his first racing. And then in high school and college, his father, Fred, had a sailboat and raced on Lake Michigan and on the inland lakes. And his father didn't smile much, as Tom will attest. And here's a picture that shows Fred with a motorcycle on Westminster, the house next to where Luke Back lives. And the folks didn't ever want him to have a motorcycle, so he had one anyway. And his friend Bud Severance, who was also a car racer, they had the motorcycle in the back of the garage and took it out when no one was looking. The picture in the middle is a son Fred and father Fred on College Road in Lake Forest before Dad shipped off to World War II. And he came back after the war, just the interest in sports car racing was taking root. Detroit, built armament in World War II, as we all know, and the cars were, according to Dad, boring. He called them Detroit Irons. They were basically boring, big, bulbous cars that weren't very interesting at all. Meanwhile, thanks to the Marshall Plan, Germany and Italy and France were building nice jewel box racing cars, sports cars, and the enjoyment of having an open top car that was small but nimble started to catch on. And my father one day took the car that his father had given him, which was a businessman's coupe that he said was the most boring car he ever owned in his life. And he took it down to Stony Island on the south side and traded it in for the MG, which you see right there. And he brought it home and he said he'd like to tell the story that his father was pretty upset. He said, "What the hell did you get? It's a little car. It looks pretty dangerous." But once he looked under the hood and saw those Weber carburetors and how neat the car was, the old man warmed up to it. And so that's about 1948 at Lake Michigan with the car. Then in 1948, in May, Fred and a friend of his went to the Indy 500 in the MG, and they were coming back from the race, and they were stuck in a traffic jam outside of Indianapolis. And two fellas, one John Paul Stack and the other Bill Spear, who was ultimately a competitor and friend of my father's racing, they were in a 1927 Bentley, a big, huge car, motor car, and they were next to the little MG with Fred and Bud in the car, and they started talking. And Bill Spear said, "Gee, with a car like that, you ought to join the Sports Car Club of America." And I wonder how we get that box out of the way. How do we get that out of the way? I don't know how we get rid of that, but there you go. So, and Dad said, "Well, what's the Sports Car Club of America?" I said, "Well, it's a group. There's a couple hundred people. There's 5 chapters, one in Milwaukee, which was the 5th chapter, New York, Boston, DC, Philadelphia, mostly East Coast. And you ought to start one. If you don't join the Milwaukee, start one." So Fred and Jim Kimberly and a couple of other people, Dave Garraway, they actually met down at the Racket Club, and they formed the Chicago region of the Sports Car Club. And that's the driver's license that he had. There you can see the MG, which now doesn't have any fenders. The head of the engine's been shaved, the sides of the bonnet have been taken off, and it's turned into more of a race car. And that was Dad's first car. And he used the 8 ball as his number anytime he could, because that was the number on his father's sails on the sailboat. And he always liked the number, and Fred Sr. had good luck running number 8. So they started the SCCA in Chicago. And his first full season competing started in Palm Beach Shores, Florida. You can see this car here is the MG. He did not finish the race, had a breakdown. And then Bridgehampton, New York, another good place where sports car racing was popular. He towed the car 800 miles out there to run. And actually that's him in an Austin Healey, which was owned by Jim Kimberly. And Jim Kimberly was a generous man who was also on the circuit. And he liked Fred, they were friends. And he gave him a faster car than the EMG, which you can see in the ditch over there, which was a slower ride. So with every successive race, he began to move up to faster and faster cars. And in that Healey Silverstone, he finished 6th overall and first in his class, and that was a pretty good start. Fred and Jim figured, you know, there are these road courses that are on the East Coast. We ought to have a Midwest venue, and so Jim Kimberly rented an airplane, a small plane, and he and Dave Garraway and Fred flew over southeastern Wisconsin, and they saw the town of Elkhart Lake. They went down there. Elkhart Lake is a nice little resort town that was on hard times after the war. And they met with the mayor and the banker and all, and they were interested in having a road race. So the SCCA and primarily Fred and Jim organized races, which happened on a road circuit over, I think, 3 seasons before Road America was built. He went to Sebring, towed the car, the 8-ball. There's the 8-ball. That's a Cadillac Allard. Sidney Allard was a Brit that built chassis, and Americans who couldn't afford a Ferrari would buy an Allard and put a Cadillac or a Chrysler motor in it. And I show these 2 pictures together because the first car Dad had that was the 8-ball was a black car, and a year later he had switched to a red car with the black 8-ball on it, and that was the car that made him a little more popular and famous. Sebring, that he was in the first Sebring race. It was a 6-hour race. It's one of the preeminent sports car races in the country today, and he won the race. But when you read the history books, he came in first in class and 8th overall because they used a handicap system, which was very controversial. And a car called a Crosley Hotshot, which went about as fast as a golf cart on Wednesday, was 8 laps behind. And so the history books say Fred covered the most miles, which usually means you win the race. And he actually did get the trophy, which is here, which was in a box. When you read the biographies of people like John Fitch, who also raced in it, they give Fred the credit for winning the first Sebring 1950, although the record books have some creative tension in them. In 1951, Eva Perón wanted to have a Grand Prix race in Argentina. And so the sports car club and on the East Coast and the West and the Midwest, they fielded a bunch of drivers. Fred is second from the left in the back row. Jim Kimberly is far on the right. John Fitch, one of the great drivers of all time, is on his knees on the right down below. And there's the 8-ball, but with number 12 on it. And you can see a little USA above the 2, because my father always thought it was important to show that the team was an American team. And he raced for in front of Perón, and they stayed at the palace, and there's his driver's license, which was in the box down below. Briggs Cunningham, famous car owner, he won the America's Cup sailing too, but entered something like 800 races as an owner over his career and ran in a couple hundred of them. He included Fred on his team that went to Le Mans in 1951. You can see under the American flag there in the picture on the lower right, there's the Dunlop Bridge. And this is just before the start, which at Le Mans, the drivers would run from one side of the track to the other, get in the car, start the car, and start the race. And they would run, 2 drivers would run for 2 each 6-hour shifts, and that's the 24 hours of Le Mans. There he is with John Fitch, who was one of the other drivers of one of the Cunningham cars. And in the upper right, Bill Spear drove the first 4 hours. Fred drove the second. Bill crashed in the dark under the Dunlop Bridge, and their day was done in 1951. But there he is on the U.S. team, which was great. Cunningham put a pretty awesome multiple car team of competitors together for Le Mans in 51. There's the program which shows the teammates, and look, they're all in coats and ties, and that's the American team. The program, again, which was in the box, and I brought it up here, only one of them. And it shows the Cunningham car, which was hand built by Briggs Cunningham. He had the funds and the wherewithal and the engineers to build his own race cars. And his collection is in the Revs Institute now in South Florida. Back to Bridgehampton. So he's going back and forth in 52 between Le Mans, which is a sports car race, obviously, and they're racing on the East Coast. And I put the picture on the left in this little presentation because look, you've just got those little snow fence and a few hay bales separating the sports car fans from the racers, and that's Bill Spear, I think, in a Ferrari in the front, and Fred in the back, trying to chase him down in the Cadillac Alley. Janesville, Wisconsin in 1952. This was the Parker Penn Company. The president of Parker Penn at the time was a race car driver, and he organized a sports car race at the Rock County Airport in Janesville, Wisconsin. It was pouring rain. You can see the storm in the back. It was an absolute downpour. And the two best cars in the race were Jim Kimberly in his Ferrari, which is number 5 there, and Fred in the 8-ball. And again, as I said earlier, the 8-ball is a poor man's Ferrari, a fast car, but no Ferrari. And Fred won the race by guile because he knew he couldn't pass for the Ferrari on the straight, so he would just stay behind Jim. And then on the last lap, when they were just a few hundred yards from the finish line, he stepped on the accelerator and cross burst. And he said that was the only time Jim Kimberly was ever really mad at him. And you can see that he got to kiss Greg Sherwood, who was an aspiring Hollywood actress there, who was from Beloit, who gave him the trophy, and Jim Kimberly didn't get to kiss her. So here's Elkhart Lake, the last road race in 52. Again, look at that street there. They're actually racing on a road course, and Road America would be built a couple of years later, but there's the 8-ball on the right, dueling again with Bill Spear, and a picture that was often published in the programs, that some of which I put on the tables today. The happy time that my old man had racing the car. They went to Watkins Glen, New York for the 52 race, which was his second race there. And this was one of the low points of Fred's racing career because, as you can see on the picture on the left, the starting grid is in downtown Watkins Glen, which is a beautiful little resort town on the Finger Lakes. And in the 52 race, there was a slight bumping of John Fitch in the white car that's in the back, and Fred's car, which is behind the flagman in the middle, and another one of the Cunningham cars that Phil Walters was driving on the right. And Fred grazed the spectators who were literally sitting on the curb, and a 7-year-old boy was killed. And that was, as I say, the low point. The officials detained Fred for the afternoon, but they ruled it an accident, which it was. And he was extremely distraught over that. And the racing season was over in 1952 after that. So not to be deterred. So as you'll see in the book, or if you study the history of this time, the road course racing was on borrowed time. the young boy that was killed in Watkins Glen in that accident wasn't the only one. There were drivers that were also being killed and other spectators that were injured or maimed because these cars were going fast and careening off the road and going into the spectators. So the townspeople and then the officials, right, started to cancel these races and said no more. And so Fred and John Fitch and some others there had the idea to get on the air bases and generate money for health and welfare for the soldiers that were at the air bases. And so around the country, from the East Coast all the way through the South, were quite a number of those races in the early 50s. And Fred did well in a few of them, as did John Fitch. And in this picture, there's Curtis LeMay, who was a huge race car fan, and Dad appealed to him to get the airbase racing started as a way to keep the sport going without canceling it altogether, because road racing was not safe anymore. And that's General LeMay on the right in the left-hand picture, taking delivery of his own Cadillac Allard. He bought two of them. And my father helped him with it because he already owned two. And then on the right, there's Fred driving LeMay's Allard in a race, which he won class overall because the Pentagon wouldn't let LeMay drive his own car. Then in 1953 and 1954, Fred tried his hand on the Formula One circuit in Europe. And this is the things that I would say growing up with him, they were the least talked about, but in a way quite remarkable what he did in that time. On the left picture, the man in the suit is Amédée Gordini. He was a Frenchman who built his own race car, Formula 2 car, which one of which Fred is sitting in, the T16 there, number 4. And that's the only picture we have in all these boxes of the car with the number 4 on it. But that car, the first time Fred drove it after a test drive on a track outside of Paris, they campaigned the car at the Grand Prix in Belgium. And Fred came in 3rd overall, which made him the first American to podium finish in Formula One race, which is kind of neat. And this was in the bottom of the box, which is the trophy, and he didn't even have it sitting out. And the picture on the right is a couple months later, the Grand Prix in the Netherlands, and he actually didn't race in that. The story why is in the book. I won't bore you with it, but it's a great picture because it shows how high up you're sitting in the car, single seater, open wheel. That car went about 180 miles an hour on the straight, no seat belt. And it just took muscle and brawn to move that car around the track. And again, you can see one of the things that Amédée Gordini agreed to do for my father is let him put the American flag on the car, even though it was a French car, because he was an American racing on the French team. He went back to Le Mans after those 2 races, and this time he's driving an Oscar. That number 47 is an Oscar, and there was a car dealer in Chicago named Edgardo Fronteras, and he wanted to, he was the Oscar importer, and he wanted to have a good showing at Le Mans because he figured it would help him sell more cars. So he got Fred to be one of the drivers and of a car that was owned by Reese Makins, who was in a Chicagoan as well. So they went over to practice for Le Mans, and Fred was fast and Reese was very slow. So Fronteras prevailed on getting Reese to get out of his car and put a new young driver in the car in his place to be Fred's teammate. And that driver in the middle picture is Phil Hill, who was at that time a rookie from the West Coast who was fast. Relatively unknown in Europe, but in 1960 or 61, Tim, he became world champion Formula One. So Dad got to race with the Formula One overall champ, which is a really high bar to climb. And they were friends throughout their lives after that. there you've got the Dunlop Bridge on the upper right being blocked by Robin Reynolds. And the Oscar is right below there on the far right. Then he went to Spa, Belgium. Again, there he's part of the French racing team at this point. The 38 car, that was what the Gordini was numbered then. You could see. I like this picture on the left because it was one of the few color pictures in the box. Red helmet, blue shirt. It's a golf shirt, white pants, and the car is red, white, and blue. And the other three guys are Frenchmen. And there's the car at speed. And if you follow Formula One today, they still race at Spa, and this is one of the most famous S curves in the track. And you've got Villarace, whose rear tire you can see. You've got Fred in the 38 at speed, and you got Andre Poulet in a Connaught behind him, and they're going about 175 miles an hour with short sleeves and no seatbelts. In 1953, Fred had fast qualifying time for the Swiss Grand Prix, but after his qualifying run was over, he seemed to recall, he couldn't remember exactly what happened, but he blacked out and found himself in the hospital with broken ribs, burns on his body, concussion, all the rest. And he spent over a month in the hospital, and I think his mother came to get him and bring him home to Lake Forest. But there he is in the hospital bed, and to the right there is the five-time world champion Juan Manuel Fangio, who didn't speak a lot of English, but these guys were all friends back in the day. And Ascari went to visit my father. Villarace went to visit him, Michael Hawthorne, the British champion, and Fangio went to visit him, which was really remarkable. And my father admired a little lapel pin that Fangio had on his jacket, and Fangio gave it to him and said, "Get better." And that's it right there. It's pretty neat. And Fangio was probably the greatest Formula One driver of all time. Back to Wisconsin, and here's Fred winning overall at Wilmot Hills. There was a track by where the ski hill is now, and it was popular in the early to late 50s. And again, there's the 8-ball brute speed, one on the last straightaway, and that was an overall one of Fred's 2 or 3 overall victories. In 54, Fred was doing airbase racing the sports cars, but he went back to Bern, the site of his accident in 54, to face his fears. And he entered the Grand Prix in Bern. And but this is a great picture because it shows the puny Gordini car, on the left, which was by 1954, they had divided the displacements into Formula One and Formula Two. The Formula One cars would go about 200 miles an hour, and the Formula Two would go 180. And that car would top out at 180. And that's Fangio on the right in the Works Mercedes 196, which was a beast, and which he did drive to the World Championship. And that's a pretty cool picture. And it's just a little tiny thing like this in the box, and we had to do the detective work to figure out who was in what car by looking at the numbers. There's more airbase racing. You can see he's driving a Arnold Bristol Bolide there that somebody owned and was trying to campaign, and they hired Fred to race because, again, he was fast. He's in the white car. But you look, there's a soldier, right? No shirt, little box telling you where the turn is, and just holding a flag, and those cars are whizzing by. So it's a bygone time. Then the race, I would say, when you talk to Dad, that he was most proud of was the racing at Monza in 1954. He went to the Grand Prix. It was a points race. All the big guns were there, including, of course, the Mercedes that we saw. And I think Fangio did win that race. I have to look. But there's the little Gordini. And I love this picture because, a white striped T-shirt, little soft helmet, goggles, his pants with a rubber band around the knee so it wouldn't get in the way. And he raced in that race. and ended up 6th overall. So he got a top 10 finish, and the magazines remarked that he drove an incredible race because he was in the most underpowered car in the top 10, and he came in 6th overall. And that was a race he was really happy to be in. If you've seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari with the Monza wall at the end, or the movie Grand Prix with James Garner where they're on the wall, he raced there, and that was it. Yeah, but he knew that his family business was calling back here. A lot of his friends were either losing their lives or sticking with the sport, and he just weighed the odds and figured that he'd had enough on the Formula One circuit and couldn't get the factory ride with the big teams. So that was his last Formula One race. A couple more pictures. There's the car, being pushed out to the grid. There's the mayhem in the middle, the start of Monza, and after it was over, a tired Fred Wacker and John Bouse, the mechanic for the team, who was with him for quite a number of years in Europe. This is cool. These pictures were in one of the boxes, and the picture on the left is taken by a man by the name of Bernard Caillet, who was a famous auto photographer of the time. It's signed on the back. He always signed his prints, and many of the pictures in the book are attributed to Caillet. But there's Fred at race time in his driving suit with his Nikon, and the rest of the pictures were pictures that he snapped by just because he liked to take pictures. That's Ascari, and I put some stats down. I just want to make sure I cover them. Alberto Raskari, he was 2 times Formula One world champion in 52 and 53 for Ferrari, reading the Motorsport magazine. Sterling Moss, with sitting on the car looking a little dejected. He won 212 of the 529 races he entered, and probably the greatest racer never to be world #1. There's Gigi Villarace down in the lower right. Look, he's just got Italian loafers on and socks and a golf shirt, and he, that's how they dressed in those days. And up above, there's Mike Hawthorne with the white pants, and he was the British F1 champion. And Jose Froilan Gonzalez, who was Argentine, who never saw a pizza he didn't like, but he actually had the distinction of giving Enzo Ferrari his first Formula One win, so was a great driver. Fred went, one of the last races he had was down south in the low country. I think it was Walterboro, South Carolina. A fellow by the name of Moran owned one of the old, no longer competitive Cunningham cars, that coupe there. He put an 8-ball on the car to appreciate Fred for driving the car. And my co-author, Bob Birmingham, said, "Fred, through my research, that's the last time your father drove a race car." And I said, "Actually, Bob, not true." Because in 1981, they had a 30-year retrospective at Laguna Seca for the vintage car races. And Briggs Cunningham brought his entire collection of Cunningham cars from Florida to Laguna Seca. And he invited all the drivers and the mechanics that were still alive from the Le Mans days. And they had a retrospective weekend during the race time. And my father didn't really tell me that this was going on, but he said, "Hey, we're going to take a motorcycle trip together." It was our 3rd coast-to-coast trip. And so we rode from Lake Forest, and we ended up in Laguna Seca like a day before this thing started. And they had a parade of the cars on the track. And the steward said, "Okay, gentlemen, you can go around the track, but don't, do anything crazy. Just go slow and wave at the fans." And they put a pillow to the right, to my father's right shoulder, and put me in the car. And they were all winking at each other. And the minute we got out of the starter's way, they all jammed on the gas. It was a pretty fun little lap around Laguna Seca. And I took that picture, which afterwards, which again, you're right, a happy man, lived a great life. And he was proud to get reunited with the buddies of his from the early 50s in France that were still alive. These boxes were full of mementos. The two little ribbons on the left, Palm Beach. That race was in Palm Beach, right? So this was Pebble Beach. Sorry, Pebble Beach. So towed out to Pebble Beach, and one of the few races that Fred's mother went to, because it says Mrs. Fred Wacker on the ribbon on the right, but that wasn't my mom because she wasn't around yet. But all these programs, and these were the source documents that we used, the programs, to figure out which car was which and which race happened when and how Dad did overall. The trophies, I brought some of them. The little goblet, second from the left, that's the Sebring 6-hour race. The cigarette box, Good Healthy Pursuit, right? A beautiful silver cigarette box from one of the air base races. This, of course, was the Argentine trophy. The one on the top right is from the Nuremberg Ring, and a lot of iron that kind of helped figure out the overall standings. And in the book, we put a table of events, and I think Dad raced in 50 races. 9 of them were Formula One, 40 or more were sports car races, and he had 2 or 3 overall firsts, many class firsts, and again, he was proud of the 3rd overall at Frontier and the 6th overall at Monza as probably the things that he looked at as his best accomplishments in the car. He made a lot of friends in the racing, and one of the reasons he stopped, right? There's Harry Schell, who was in some of the earlier pictures. He was a American expat who lived in Paris. His parents lived in Paris, and he was a tier 2 racer, and he was killed in 1960 at Goodwood in a practice session. The picture on the top, Fred and Tommy Cole. Tommy Cole was one of the guys that he was the first racer of the Cadillac, of the Allard, and he encouraged Fred to get into the Allard in the sports cars because he thought it was a good car for him. And Tommy Cole was killed in 1955 at Le Mans, the White House turn. He crashed into the wall and died. And that was a heartbreaker for the old man because they were close. Down below, the Marquis de Portago, one of the playboys that drove for Ferrari. He was killed in 1958, driving 160 mile an hour in Ferrari, and the flat tire threw him out of the car and he was killed. There's Phil Hill up above, gave me an autograph program to remember his time with my father. And there down at Bridgehampton, there's Bill Spear, who, look, he won the race. In that race, Fred came in second. And what is Bill Spear wearing? He's wearing an Oxford shirt with a tie, and he's smoking a cigarette. and that's the end.
Questions?
Yeah, just a real quick postscript. So in earlier this year, and Bob, my friend Bob Birmingham, who I'm proud to call friend now because we really worked hard on this book. And it was just so that my kids and family would be able to make some sense of these things. And I got to give you a lot of the credit, Tim, for saying, Fred, you need to do this. And it turned out, finding Bob was wonderful. And we were asked to give a similar talk up at Elkhart Lake in the summer, which was the 70th anniversary of the Elkhart Lake Road Races. And what's interesting about Elkhart Lake is that it took about 20 years for the townspeople to protect the original road course from development. And there was a fellow that I talked to in writing the book named Spencer Chappell, who's still alive, who lives on the course, on the road course. And the story goes, he told me, Fred, I was going out to get my mail one day, and I'm on the trunk road, and I went out to get the mail, and there's a guy in a a neon blade, a neon vest, spray painting on his right of way. And he said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, it's a state project. We're going to widen the road and put curbs in." And Spencer walked back to his house and he said, "Fred," I mumbled to myself, "No, you're not." And so they set about getting the course documented and protected forever. And meanwhile, Road America, which is just a couple miles away from downtown Elkhart Lake, is one of the premier road courses in the country. And now the Elkhart Lake Road Course, both Course A and Course B, are on the historic register. And Fred and Jim and John Fitch and some of the other people are duly recognized on plaques around the course for having the guts to fly over the town and figure this thing out and get it started. And so I just wanted to show a couple pictures. We sold more than 2 books. That's Bob on the right, and we're in the little bar at Siebken's, and boy, about 80 or 90 people came out, mostly townspeople and local fans that knew either of Fred Wacker. They definitely know what made Elkhart Lake special, and they came out for the dinner. And then there were 3 cars there, which were kind of neat. A nice little Porsche Cabriolet there. And then a car that the person came up and he said, "Well, when your father was racing at for Perón in Argentina, this car was one of the cars in the field, and the family still owns it. And look, it's got a Buenos Aires license plate on it." So to see a car that was in that race so many years ago was pretty neat. And then not the 8-ball, but the same kind of car. This one has right-hand drive, or I'm sorry, left-hand drive instead of right-hand drive like Fred's did. But it was neat to sit in the car and saw my dad race as a kid, helped me write the book, and he made me get in the car too. It was pretty neat. So that's it. I'll take any questions that you have.
Are any of the cars in your garage?
No. The Gordinis are in the Schlumpf Museum in France. The Cunningham cars are in the Revs Institute in Palm Beach, I think is where it is. And the Allard is in the 8-ball. The MG is gone. The Allard is in a garage in Milwaukee. An old man owns it. It was in a fire. It's sitting on blocks. There's no engine in it. It is the 8-ball. He won't sell it. It's just up there rusting away. And he knows he's got a car that was famous in the Midwest. Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah, Hugh.
Yeah, you mentioned one race that your dad won, but he declared to be 6th because of the handicapping, which is controversial. What was the basis for handicapping?
So it's interesting. So there was a fellow named Alec Allman, who was one of the early kind of organizers of the SCCA racing, and he felt that the racing should be professionalized. But Fred, with the SCCA, that was an amateur group. And I did leave out the detail that, so he was the organizer. They made him the first leader of the Chicago region. And then in 52 and 53, he was the overall president of the SCCA. And it had grown to 43 chapters around the country versus the original 5, with about 4,500 members. And so Fred felt responsible to keep the amateur part of the racing going. And that's where the tension was. And since Ullman was one of the organizers, he kind of pushed the handicapping as a way to make sure that the little guy won the race. Yeah. And it's really interesting because I've got about 2 or 3 books on the subject, and they all say about the same thing. But John Fitch's book, who was there and raced with Fred, he's like, Fred Wacker won the race. We all know he won the race. So, yeah, it's a good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you share some of your favorite memories of going to the Indy 500 with your dad? I mean, you went pretty much every year, right?
Yeah, went every year. First race he took me to was 1968 when Bobby Unser won. And then in 69, it was one of my favorite of all time. I was only 9 years old, but we saw Mario Andretti win the race, his only win. And he was a Formula One champion too. And Dad was close to Andy Granatelli, who lived in Northbrook at the time. And so we got to go to the driver's dinner afterwards and sit with Mario and Andy Granatelli and all that, and all the drivers of the day. And I've had more fun going to Indianapolis than just about anywhere. It's like a pilgrimage because, we would go and sit together, and Dad was a legend down there. I mean, we have books at home that have all the drivers, signing to him because he was one of the pioneers. He never raced in Indy. He wasn't into the circle, and that was a different thing. But he did like to go to Indianapolis, and I still love to go today. It's great. I think I've been to my 52nd or 53rd one in a row. I haven't missed one except for COVID year where we had to watch it on TV. And this is pretty neat too. I wanted to show you this. So this is a book called American Grand Prix Racing. And a fellow by the name of Tim Considine put this book together. And it's the history of all the American drivers from the beginning till the end. He inscribed it because this book was published a couple of months before my father passed away. And he wrote, "Fred, you bear the name and blood of one of the heroes about which this book is written and to whom it's dedicated. I'm honored to know you and your wonderful dad, Fred. All the best, Tim Considine." And you look at this, I'll pass it around, but he made 250 copies and had all the drivers that were alive sign the book. And so this signature page went around, and he bound them into 250 books. And Mario Andretti, Michael Andretti, Skip Barber, Bondurant, Jay Chamberlain, Eddie Cheever, Chuck Dye, John Fitch, Dan Gurney, Jim Hall, Phil Hill, Danny Ongais, Sam Posey, Bobby Rahal, Lloyd Ruby, Carol Shelby, Danny Sullivan, Roger Ward, Fred Wacker. Pretty neat. It's like a really cool book.
Fred, how big was the box? Was it one box?
So,
or a million?
yeah, Marina, I would
And
say.
Was it layered?
No, there were two boxes about yay big and one that was a little longer, like, a garment box. And this stuff was just piled in there. And, my mother threw away some stuff in her life and she didn't throw that stuff away, which was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really neat. And, there's still, we scratched the surface. I mean, we got figured out some, together. Bob did a lot of the research and I did the story weaving, and we had so much fun doing it. And it's really fun to look at these old programs like this one. Howard Simpson told me today that his father raced an Oscar. And this is Andrews Air Force Base. And Fred Wacker, Lake Forest, Illinois, Cadillac Allard, Class B. James Simpson Jr., Wadsworth, Illinois, Oscar, Class F. They were in the same race together. Pretty neat. Yeah, pretty neat. So,
All right, well, thanks, everybody.
thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Help yourself.
We shared a long time. His first race, he drove it so hard. I didn't see that in the book.
Yeah, because I didn't know that.
Fred, the F1 history of your dad, I had no idea.
What's that?
I had no idea about your dad's F1 race.
Yeah.
I knew he was a car guy, but then
Yeah. Right here? Sure.
well, that Fred said mine too. But
Good. Obviously.
You know, I think I've mentioned it to you before. Your father was 1 year behind my father at Yale, and they weren't friends. They knew each other.
where did you sign that? I want it right there. It's a good spot right there, Fred. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we've been collecting as much because it's fun to keep it. So through my Robbie's and even my dad and some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But we've started collecting it.
Yeah.
We've got a place up in Harbor Springs, we
Yeah.
call it the Hangar.
Yeah.
And we've got some window boxes. So we're
Yeah.
trying to get it so our kids and other kids. But it's all in boxes and junk.
Yeah. And this was like one bad decision from going to the dumpster. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there.
Oh my God.
You know,
Like
when you,
that, like
when you
that,
talk,
like that. That's it.
The pig you got me with
Yeah,
Bonnie.
isn't that awesome? I mean,
It's like
awesome.
getting a goose.
I know, I know, and I met Bonjo later,
Did
you know, and it's like, to me, the best.
yeah, you talk about your dad being a legend, so all the guys, his dad, he's a double legend, because he had taken his spot, somebody else got it.
Yeah.
All the musicians will be over there. Okay.
It's good stuff, Fred.
Thank you.
Really glad to see you.
What a guy. I told him. First time we came to California, I rented a car, we came up, and Mom came out. I said, "No, Fred's on the ride, he's not to see you." So I walked on, I walked, he's lying on his back under a motorcycle.
Yeah.
I said, "How you feel?"
I want a signature too. I want an autograph.
Did you enjoy it?
I love it. You know, of course, Fred, I remember seeing your dad in the Lake Forest Day Parade all the time. And yes, the enthusiasm to which my parents or Lake Forest, Lake Bluff parades, either one, would be, oh, there's Fred, there's Fred.
Yeah.
But I can only
Isn't that something?
yeah, no, it's just,
Cool,
oh my
right?
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the daunting task of
Yeah.
getting into those boxes
Yeah.
and realizing you have to do something.
Yeah, you have to do something, and you could do more, but Bob is like, this is interesting, I should have said, Bob Birmingham was like, got introduced to him from one of the guys that helped preserve the racetrack up there. Because you should talk to Bob Birmingham, we're a book about all the dads and blah, blah, blah. So I call him up, and he goes, well, I'd like to do it with you, Fred. Are you the technical director? I said, no, I'm the senior. He's not allowed to. But I said, what would you like to start? I said, what, tomorrow? He goes, I'm 83, we gotta get
We
going.
gotta get going. Yeah, exactly. Good. Well, that's how you know you were supposed
Thanks,
to
Fred.
do it.
Yeah. Really fun, really fun. Who knew?
Can't chance it.
Yeah, how about that? No pro racing cars. That was pretty fun.
Every time I see something like this, I go, thanks for coming. I can't tell you. It wasn't quite what it is today, and then I think that's. Well, I was with you. To be my. How are you?